At exactly 11:43 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night, I sat inside my car, outside our apartment building with divorce papers folded in my jacket pocket and a voicemail from my wife playing over and over again on my phone. "Ethan, I can't do this anymore." Those 6 words shattered 15 years of marriage in less than 10 seconds. What made it worse was the fact that I had spent the previous 3 months secretly planning a surprise anniversary trip to Italy, because I thought we were finally healing. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt, while rain crashed against the windshield like tiny bullets. I was 40 years old, emotionally exhausted, broke from trying to save a marriage that had already died quietly behind my back, and completely unaware that before sunrise, my entire life would collapse in ways I never imagined possible. If you've ever believed your best years were behind you, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, failure, loneliness, and starting over. My name is Ethan Cole, and for most of my life, I believed stability was the same thing as happiness. I met my wife, Rebecca, when we were 23. Back then, she laughed loudly at my terrible jokes and held my hand like she never wanted to let go. We built our lives the traditional way: marriage at 25, our first apartment at 27, a mortgage at 32, promotions, weekend barbecues, matching Christmas pajamas. To outsiders, we looked like the kind of couple people envied quietly from a distance. But somewhere between responsibilities, bills, disappointments, and routines, we stopped seeing each other. We became co-workers managing survival instead of lovers building a life together. Still, I ignored the warning signs because denial is comfortable when the truth is terrifying. I convinced myself every marriage had rough seasons. I told myself distance was temporary. I told myself silence didn't mean disconnection. I kept believing tomorrow would somehow fix what we refused to address today. The first real crack appeared on my 40th birthday. Rebecca barely looked at me during dinner that night. We sat across from each other in a crowded restaurant while a jazz singer performed softly near the corner stage. I remember watching couples around us laugh and touch each other casually, while my wife scrolled through her phone between forced conversations. Halfway through the meal, I asked her if she was happy. She paused long before answering. That silence hit me harder than any insult ever could. "I don't know anymore," she finally whispered. I laughed nervously and changed the subject because I didn't want to hear the truth hiding underneath those words. Looking back now, I realized that was the exact moment my marriage ended emotionally. Even if the paperwork came months later, some relationships don't explode suddenly. They die slowly, one unanswered question at a time. 3 weeks later, I discovered Rebecca had been emotionally involved with someone from her office for nearly a year. I wish I could tell you I reacted with anger or dramatic confrontation, but honestly, I just felt numb. The evidence sat there glowing on a laptop screen while she showered upstairs. Messages, late-night conversations, shared hotel photos from business trips. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing she had become vulnerable with someone else while I was still desperately trying to reconnect with the woman I married. I sat in the dark living room until almost sunrise, staring at those messages while every memory from our marriage replayed inside my head like scenes from a cruel movie. By morning, I felt older than 40. I felt hollow. When she came downstairs and saw my face, she already knew. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Then she cried quietly and said the words I still remember perfectly. "I didn't mean for this to happen." People always imagine heartbreak as screaming arguments and shattered glass, but sometimes heartbreak is painfully quiet. Rebecca moved into the guest room after that conversation. We continued living in the same house, like strangers trapped in a polite prison. We discussed groceries, bills, and laundry, while pretending our lives weren't collapsing around us. Friends noticed something was wrong, but we lied skillfully, because adults become experts at hiding emotional disasters behind smiles. Nights became unbearable. I would hear her moving around in the next room, while wondering how two people who once couldn't sleep apart now avoided eye contact in their own kitchen. The loneliness inside marriage is a special kind of pain because the person who could comfort you was also the source of your suffering. Every morning, I woke up hoping things would somehow reverse themselves. Every evening, reality crushed at hope again. Then came the night she officially ended it. The rainstorm, the voicemail, the divorce papers. Rebecca told me she was leaving for Chicago with the man from her office. She said she needed a fresh start. Imagine hearing that after dedicating 15 years of your life to someone. Imagine realizing you fought harder for a relationship than the person standing beside you. I drove aimlessly 4 hours that night. While the city lights blurred through tears, I kept trying to hide from myself. Around 2 a.m., I parked near an empty diner and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, defeated, older. There was this terrifying thought running through my head over and over again. What if this is it? What if life only gets worse from here? At 40 years old, starting over felt impossible. Dating felt impossible. Healing felt impossible. Even waking up the next morning felt impossible. The weeks after the separation nearly destroyed me completely. I stopped answering calls. I stopped shaving regularly. My appetite disappeared. Some mornings, I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour trying to find enough motivation just to shower. The house felt haunted by memories. Rebecca's coffee mug still sat beside the sink. Her perfume lingered faintly in the hallway. Even silence carried reminders of her absence. One afternoon, my younger sister, Claire, showed up unexpectedly with groceries and forced me to eat something besides instant noodles. She looked around the messy living room and burst into tears. "Ethan, this isn't you," she said. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because honestly, I didn't know who I was anymore. For 15 years, my identity had been built around being a husband. Without that role, I felt invisible, empty, disposable. About 2 months after Rebecca left, I lost my job too. The company I had worked for nearly 11 years announced major layoffs, and my name landed on the list. I remember sitting inside the HR office, listening to rehearsed sympathy, while feeling strangely detached from reality. It almost felt comedic, like life had decided to destroy every piece of stability, had left all at once. Marriage gone, career gone, savings draining rapidly, confidence non-existent. I walked out carrying a cardboard box with framed photos and office supplies, while younger employees avoided eye contact around me. That drive home was darker than the night Rebecca left, because now I wasn't just heartbroken. I was terrified. 40 years old, divorced, unemployed, alone. I kept thinking about how everyone says, your 40s are supposed to be your peak years. Mine felt like a funeral. The lowest point came 3 days later. I was sitting on my bathroom floor at 4 a.m. surrounded by overdue bills and unopened emails, while staring at an old photograph from my wedding day. Rebecca looked radiant in that picture. I looked hopeful. There was this painful realization sinking into my chest that the version of me in that photograph no longer existed. I cried harder that night than I ever had in my adult life, not just because I missed my marriage, but because I missed myself. I missed the man who believed life would work out eventually. At some point during that breakdown, my phone buzzed beside me. It was a text from Claire. Just 4 words. "Please don't disappear. Ethan." I stared at those words for a long time. Something about them pierced through the darkness inside me. Maybe because deep down, I knew I had already started disappearing emotionally long before anyone noticed. The next morning, I did something small that unexpectedly changed everything. I went for a walk. That's it. Nothing dramatic. No motivational speech. No miraculous transformation. Just a tired 40-year-old man walking through his neighborhood at sunrise because staying inside felt unbearable. The air was cold, and the streets were mostly empty except for joggers and dog walkers. I remember noticing details I had ignored for years. Birds perched on power lines, fresh bread smell drifting from a nearby bakery, elderly couples holding hands while crossing intersections slowly. Life kept moving despite my heartbreak. That realization frustrated me at first. How dare the world continue normally while mine had collapsed? But somewhere during that walk, another thought emerged quietly. Maybe movement itself was survival. Maybe healing didn't begin with huge breakthroughs. Maybe it started with simply refusing to remain frozen. Those morning walks became routine. Every day at sunrise, I forced myself outside regardless of how miserable I felt. Some mornings I cried while walking. Other mornings I replayed arguments inside my head. But gradually, the routine gave structure to days that previously felt meaningless. Around this time, I met Walter. He was a 72-year-old retired mechanic who always sat on the same park bench feeding pigeons. The first few times, we only exchanged polite nods. Then one morning he asked, "You carrying heartbreak or regret?" I laughed awkwardly because it was such a strange question. "Both," I answered honestly. Walter nodded like he understood completely. "Good," he said. "Means you're still alive." Over the next several weeks, Walter became an unexpected mentor in my life. He had buried a wife, survived bankruptcy twice, and once lived in his car for nearly a year. Yet somehow, he still smiled easily. One particularly cold morning, I confessed to Walter that I felt too old to rebuild my life. He stared at me for several seconds before saying something I'll never forget. "Son, people don't stop living because they get old. They get old because they stop living." That sentence stayed inside my head for days. I realized I had spent months acting like my story was already over simply because one chapter ended painfully. But maybe heartbreak at 40 wasn't proof life was finished. Maybe it was proof life was unpredictable. There's a difference. Walter encouraged me to start doing uncomfortable things again. "Your confidence won't return while you're hiding," he said. So reluctantly, I started saying yes to opportunities I normally avoided. Community events, networking meetups, volunteer programs, anything that forced me back into the world. One Saturday afternoon, Claire convinced me to attend a local charity fundraiser downtown. I almost cancelled 3 times before finally going. The event was crowded, loud, and filled with strangers pretending to enjoy small talk. I felt completely out of place standing near the refreshments table in an old navy blazer that barely fit anymore. Then I met Lena Brooks. She accidentally spilled sparkling water on my sleeve while reaching for a napkin and immediately looked horrified. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she said, while grabbing tissues frantically. I laughed for the first time in weeks. A genuine laugh, not forced, not polite, real. We started talking casually near the corner of the ballroom while people danced nearby. Lena was 38, divorced, and worked as a pediatric physical therapist. There was something calming about her presence. She listened carefully when people spoke. She made eye contact fully. She didn't seem interested in pretending life was perfect. Over the next month, Lena and I crossed paths repeatedly. Coffee shops, volunteer events, bookstores. Eventually, she admitted Claire had secretly arranged some of those coincidental meetings because she was worried about me isolating myself. Normally, I would have found that embarrassing, but honestly, I was grateful. Lena never pressured me to discuss my divorce, yet somehow she created space where honesty felt safe. One evening during dinner, she told me about her own heartbreak. Her ex-husband had left after years of infertility struggles destroyed their marriage emotionally. I kept blaming myself for not being enough, she admitted quietly. Hearing her vulnerability cracked something open inside me. For the first time since Rebecca left, I realized pain wasn't unique to me. Everyone around me carried invisible battles. Some just hid them better than others. Karma. Despite our growing connection, fear controlled me constantly. I worried Lena would eventually leave too. I analyzed every delayed text message, every cancel plan, every moment of silence. Heartbreak changes your nervous system. It teaches you to expect abandonment, even during peaceful moments. One night after dinner, Lena looked directly at me and asked, "Why do you always seem prepared for disaster?" I froze because nobody had ever asked me that so bluntly before. After several seconds, I finally answered honestly, because the last person I trusted completely destroyed me. Lena reached across the table slowly and squeezed my hand. "I'm not Rebecca," she whispered. Simple words, yet hearing them felt terrifying and comforting simultaneously. Around this time, I also began rebuilding professionally. Through connections from volunteer work, I landed freelance consulting projects for small businesses struggling with financial management. The income wasn't huge initially, but for the first time in months, I felt useful again, capable again. I converted part of my garage, a small office, and started working obsessively. There's something healing about purpose. It gives wounded people somewhere to place their energy besides grief. Slowly, clients increased, recommendations spread. Within a year, I had built a small consulting firm generating more income than my previous corporate job ever provided. But the biggest transformation wasn't financial, it was internal. I stopped seeing myself as a man abandoned by life. I started seeing myself as someone still evolving. Then came the phone call that nearly pulled me backward again. Rebecca wanted to meet. We hadn't spoken meaningfully in over a year, besides legal paperwork and occasional logistical messages. My stomach twisted the moment I heard her voice. We met at a quiet cafe downtown on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She looked different, older somehow, tired around the eyes. After awkward small talk, she admitted her relationship with the man from Chicago had ended badly. I made mistakes, she said softly while staring into her coffee. Part of me expected satisfaction hearing that. Instead, I mostly felt sadness, not because I wanted her back, but because I finally understood something painful. Broken people often break other people while trying to escape themselves. Rebecca apologized for everything. The affair, the lies, the emotional distance. I listened quietly. Then she asked the question I never expected. Do you think we could ever try again? For several seconds, the entire cafe seemed silent. A year earlier, I would have given anything to hear those words. But life had changed me. Pain had changed me. I looked at Rebecca carefully and realized I no longer saw home when I looked at her. I saw history. There's a difference. I forgive you, I said finally. But we can't rebuild something that taught us how to destroy each other. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Mine too. We hugged briefly outside beneath the rain before walking in opposite directions. And strangely, instead of devastation, I felt closure. Real closure. Not because every wound healed instantly, but because I no longer needed the past to validate my future. A few months later, Lena invited me to meet her parents during Thanksgiving weekend. I was nervous the entire drive there. Commitment terrified me now, because love felt dangerous after everything I survived. That night after dinner, Lena's father pulled me aside while everyone cleaned dishes in the kitchen. She smiles differently around you, he said quietly. Haven't seen that in years. His words hit me unexpectedly hard. Because the truth was, I smiled differently around Lena too. She didn't rescue me from heartbreak. She simply reminded me I was still capable of connection after it. That matters. Healthy love doesn't erase pain magically. It teaches you pain, but doesn't own your entire future. The real turning point happened during a road trip along the Oregon coast. Lena and I rented a small cabin overlooking the ocean for 4 days. On our second night there, a violent storm knocked out electricity across the area. We sat wrapped in blankets near the fireplace, listening to rain hammer against the windows, while waves crashed violently below the cliffs. At one point, Lena asked me, "What scares you most now?" I stared into the fire for a long time before answering, wasting the rest of my life being afraid. Saying those words aloud felt like confession, because heartbreak had stolen years from me emotionally. Fear had stolen even more. That night, sitting beside the woman who entered my life unexpectedly after devastation nearly destroyed me, I realized survival alone wasn't enough anymore. I wanted joy again, purpose again, love again. 2 years after my divorce, my consulting business expanded into a proper office downtown with 6 employees. Claire handled marketing. Walter occasionally visited just to criticize our coffee machine and tell inappropriate jokes to interns. Life became unexpectedly full again. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I discovered the wedding photograph that once made me collapse on my bathroom floor. I stared at it quietly for several minutes. The grief attached to it was gone. not erased completely, but softened by time and perspective. I finally understood something important. The younger version of me in that photo wasn't foolish for believing in love. He was brave. Even failed relationships contain courage, because loving deeply always risks heartbreak. That realization brought peace I never thought possible. On my 43rd birthday, Lena organized a small gathering at our house with close friends and family. At some point during the evening, Walter raised his glass dramatically and announced, "To Ethan, proof that life ain't done with you just because pain introduces itself." Everyone laughed, but I nearly cried, because 3 years earlier, I genuinely believed my life had ended emotionally. I believed heartbreak at 40 meant permanent failure. I believed starting over belonged to younger people with fewer scars. I was wrong, completely wrong. Sometimes life destroys the version of you that can no longer carry you into the future you actually need. A few weeks later, Lena and I visited the same diner parking lot where I once sat alone after Becca left. She asked why I wanted to stop there specifically. I told her everything. The rain, the hopelessness, the fear that my story was over. She listened quietly while squeezing my hand. Then she smiled gently and said, "Imagine if you had given up that night." I looked around the empty parking lot while emotions tightened inside my chest. Because she was right. If I had surrendered to hopelessness during my darkest season, I would have missed every beautiful thing waiting on the other side of survival. *** now. Whenever someone tells me they feel too old to rebuild after heartbreak, I understand exactly what they mean. Starting over at 40 feels humiliating initially. Everyone expects you to have life figured out by then. But the truth is, adulthood humbles all of us eventually. Marriages end. Careers collapse. Friendships fade. Plans fail. The real measure of a person isn't whether life breaks them. Life breaks everyone eventually. The real measure is whether they keep moving afterward. If you're listening to my story right now while sitting inside your own heartbreak, your own disappointment, your own fear that it's too late for happiness, hear me carefully. Your life is not over because one chapter ended painfully. You are not disqualified from joy because someone failed to love you correctly. Sometimes the collapse you're mourning is actually the beginning of the life you were meant to discover. I know it doesn't feel that way during lonely nights. I know healing seems impossibly slow, but survival creates possibilities despair can't imagine. I used to believe heartbreak at 40 meant I had failed permanently. Now I understand something entirely different. Starting over at 40 wasn't punishment. It was permission. Permission to rebuild honestly. Permission to rediscover myself beyond roles and expectations. Permission to stop surviving half-heartedly and finally start living intentionally. And if there's one thing I want you to remember after hearing my story, it's this. Sometimes life breaks your heart not to end your story, but to force you into the chapter where you finally become who you were always meant to be.